To the Audit Committee meeting for Tuesday, November 9th, 2021. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask Trustee Gray to please read the acknowledgement of traditional lands.
Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. From the Anishinaabe to the Attawandaran, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions: land, waters, plants, animals, and ancestors that walked before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us.
Thank you very much, Jean. Do we have any declarations of possible conflict of interest for this meeting? Seeing none, we will move on to the next item, which is the introduction of our new Regional Internal Audit Manager. Andrea Altherington has been a senior auditor on the RIAT team for 11 years since its inception. She has several certifications and a master's degree to go with it. We would like to very much welcome Andrea to the position of manager for the RIAT team and wish her all the best as she proceeds to conduct all of the regional internal audits for the year. Thanks very much and welcome, Andrea.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Could I please have a mover for the approval of the agenda? Trustee Gray, seconded by Trustee Reynolds. Or is there any discussion regarding the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you very much. That passes unanimously. Moving on to items of ratification, the minutes of the Audit Committee meeting from September 28th, 2021. Could I have a mover for passing the minutes, please? Trustee Reynolds, seconded by Sana. Is there any discussion of the minutes? Trustee Gray. Trustee Gray, you're muted.
Yes, thank you very much. I wanted to look at, I think it's 4.2 on the minutes.
Yes? Public questions and answers?
Yes, no, it wasn't that at all. It was no, I will defer. It's actually another section around. So I'm sorry. Just carry on.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Ngoy.
Thank you. I believe it was section 4.1 that Trustee Gray was referring to.
Yes, thank you, Roxana, for finding that so quickly. I was out by one. I just wondered if we could include in that passage, as we recognize the internal auditor manager's work and their departure, I wondered if we could just include Jenny Baker's name in that. I think it would just be a nice add. Thank you.
Good catch, Jean. Very good. Is there any other notation or comment regarding the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor? Can't see all the hands.
Trustee Gray has a hand up.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. That passes. And moving.
Point of order.
Yes?
I'm just wondering, would it be easier for you if we just used our hands up with that, all use one way or the other? Because I can see that this is a
Yeah, using
orchestrating.
Yes, using the hands up does make it a little bit easier because it shows me the label of all the names that have their hands up, so that when I can't see every person, that would be a wonderful thing to do. Yes, thank you very much. So the next item on the agenda is the election of the Audit Committee Vice Chair for 2021-2022. And so I will open the floor to nominations or to anyone who would like to put their name forward. And it would give me great pleasure to nominate Dan Mackerel for the position of Vice Chair of the Audit Committee for this year. Dan, would you accept this nomination?
Yep, I would accept that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations? I'll ask one more time. Are there any other nominations for the position of Vice Chair of the Audit Committee? Thank you. Seeing none, you are acclaimed, Mr. Mackerel. Now we need to pass the motion officially. Be it resolved that Dan Mackerel be appointed as Vice Chair of the Audit Committee for the 2021-2022 fiscal year. Moved by Trustee Reynolds, seconded by Trustee Gray. All those in favor? Perfect. That passes unanimously. Congratulations. Dan, what would you like to say? Anything?
Oh, I'll just say thank you. I know we have a busy agenda, so I'll leave it at that. Looking
Thanks
forward
so
to it.
much.
Good.
Thanks so much. Okay, we have approval of business transacted in private session next. And I believe we have 3 items from private session. The receipt of 3 different reports. Can we move them in one motion, or do we need to have separate motions for each? One motion? Okay, so be it resolved that the motions from private session be approved in public session. And the motion is being made by Trustee Reynolds, seconded by Trustee Gray. Is there any discussion? Trustee Gray. You're muted.
Sorry. I wonder if this motion shouldn't read that the items passed and approved in private session as they relate to, and then would it not be appropriate to sort of have titles? Because I think it's kind of wide open. So even if we could just insert the titles of those 3 reports, if you would, I think that would be more transparent. Thank you.
Yes, my intent was just to vocally say a brief motion, and then in the report it would detail the private session reports.
I see that Catherine has indicated that she will include that in the motion. Thank you.
Yeah. Is there any other conversation on this motion? All those in favor? Thank you very much. That motion passes. The next item of business is our action items, starting with the financial reports. And I will turn that over to Roxanne Nagoy.
Thank you, Chair Collard, and through you to the Audit Committee chairs. We are pleased to provide the Audit Committee with the financial statements and accumulated surplus balances for the year ended August 31st, 2021. I wanted to just take a moment and thank the staff that have been trivial to providing this report and all the work that is in the background in developing the audited financial statements, the many forms and ministry reporting requirements that go with it. It's always a very busy start of the year, and my team has been working long hours and evenings and weekends in trying to meet all the deadlines to be able to have a timely fiscal year end and a clean audit opinion on our financial statements. So I would like to first start by thanking my staff. We could not have done it without you. And I have the pleasure to walk you quickly through the financial statements for the year. We do have a surplus position of 11.7 million as a result of, in part, school closures through the year and additional funding that has been released by the ministry throughout the year. We were aware there would be some funding for the year, but at the time of the budget and revised budget, they were not formally announced or allocated on a per board basis. So we were not able to include them in the budget numbers. So therefore, we did end the year in a surplus position. We do recommend to the audit committee and the board to do a reallocation of accumulated surplus to various categories, including allowing about 3% of the provincial allocation in a non-designated surplus account to allow for emergencies and COVID-related challenges that may come our way in the year to come or the years to come, as well as designated 21 million in the student achievement surplus, which will support the multi-year plan, all 5 priority areas or commitments in the multi-year plan, and some additional areas that have been rolled over, carried over, such as decentralized school budgets and technology for the implementation of the student information system. So all that is detailed in Appendix A to the report, and the Appendix B to the report has the draft audit committee. So it has a draft financial statements, and I just wanted to mention that on page 16 of your package, you have the consolidated statement of financial position, which is our balance sheet. And you will note there has been a main change in cash and cash equivalents, as well as the accounts receivable. And the main change there is as a result of the delayed grant payment for cash and cash receivable, as the ministry retains a portion of our grants through the year as part of the cash management strategy of the province. And the accounts receivable is as a result of collecting the education taxes or the municipal taxes that have been deferred during the year and recovered towards the end of the year. In terms of the page 17, the consolidated financial statements that provides our financial position, so revenues and expenses for the year. The revenues, about 90% of revenues are provided through provincial grants or the grants for student needs. They are higher than the prior year, mainly as a result of the collective agreement. So central bargaining had completed and resulted in a class size change of 23-1 for secondary panel, which was below what was sanctioned the year before. So that resulted in additional funding, as well as there's additional funding you'll see in other provincial grants as a result of one-time COVID supports through the year. And expenses do match the expectation of the additional funding that was provided and the additional supports and resources that were acquired. And overall, we do have a total accumulated surplus position overall of 317 million, most of that being attributed to land acquisitions, and the in-year change, it's 11.7 million. A couple of notes that I wanted to draw your attention. Note 1 has a change in the amortization, of the computer hardware from 3 to 5 years. And that increased the amortization in year when we compare year over year. The note 12 identifies the in-kind transfers from the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services for the procurement of personal and protective equipment. So we've recognized about 10 million in in-kind PPE received through the year. And note 20 is the disclosure around the COVID pandemic and potential risks and uncertainty. as it relates to our revenues and expenses. And lastly, subsequent events. Note, we do have a window of opportunity to update any subsequent events before the financial statements get approved. I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm having some wonky Wi-Fi issues, and it keeps telling me to turn off my camera and turn off my sound. So I may be out of lockstep a little bit here. We do need to make a motion before we have any questions to receive this report. Trustee Reynolds, and seconded by Dan Mackerel. Thank you very much. And now for questions, I will go to Trustee Reynolds and Trustee Gray.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair, I would just like to thank you for this report tonight. I absolutely will be supporting this motion, moving this on to the Board of Trustees. And I just really had one question out of public interest, and it's with respect to our laptops and devices that we purchase for students. During the COVID shutdown, our board purchased an allotment of devices for purpose of sending them home for online learning. And I'm just wondering if you could share just how many laptops were purchased and how many of them came back, either spoiled or did not come back, and how has management determined a provision for this, and how does it get recorded in the financials and also for the ministry?
Thank you for that question, Trustee Reynolds. We have purchased over 3,000 laptops, tablets for staff and students, and distributed a lot more than that. I don't have the actual number of how many were distributed because schools did give out existing technology as well, in addition to the additional purchases. Each school has an inventory management approach to keep track of devices being signed out and being returned. To our knowledge, all of the devices have been returned. However, we do have about 300 devices that came in with a need to be repaired. So some damage. That is quite expected in the education sector and the use by students of the technology. The ministry tried to capture that in reducing the useful life of technology from 5 years to 3, understanding that not only it becomes obsolete in terms of technology, but also in terms of use and the ability to still be productive on that device based on how it's being used in the classroom. So that certainly takes that into account. We do account for the computer hardware as a whole, so the cost of all of them together as opposed to individually tracked from an accounting perspective. And unless the spillage is significant, we would not have obsolete inventory or a write-down. But to the best of our knowledge, schools only indicated about 300 devices that needed attention and repair. We continue to have an allocation both centrally through the IT budget as well as at the decentralized level with each school. They have a budget allocated for technology renewal, so they can continue to add to their fleet and replace any equipment that becomes obsolete as well.
Trustee Gray?
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to look at the page 10 in the report, and it's the section that looks at EDC. I'm just getting this up in front here. Yes, it's a part there, the EDC. Let's see here. There it is, yes. I see that there was a deficit of 25 million a year ago, and now it's 20 million. And while this is moving in the right direction, What is your forecast over the next few years to reduce this even further? And does this depend upon whether or not we raise the EDC rates?
Thank you for that question, Trustee Gray. This is, as a growth board, we expect this will actually go up, not down. So we do not have a strategy to bring this down because we have a number of school sites that we are about to purchase as per our long-term accommodation plan. So South Milton and North Oakville are growth areas, and we have future school sites. If I look at 3-year term, I would expect this would be a $70 to $80 million deficit when we look at the cost of acquiring land, less the education development charges coming in through that period of time. So the fact that it's lower than last year, it's only a timing change because one site acquisition hasn't taken place. It's been a bit delayed in the process, and otherwise it would have been higher than the prior year. Having said that, to the second part of your question, yes, it absolutely is, a function of the education development charges and our ability to charge or not charge enough. The education development charges have been frozen in terms of the ability to increase them and do not keep up with the appreciation of land. So land values have appreciated a lot faster than we are able to collect. First, we collect over a period of 15 years. So we're always going to be a little bit behind before we collect for that, the amount that we foresee for the current needs. And second, because the education development charge levies are a lot lower than our background study suggests in terms of the land values that we expect. So it's a factor of both of those conditions.
May I have a follow-up?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I would have to imagine that our board, even in so much as that we have currently a 20 million deficit, that we may not be the highest in deficit of all boards in Ontario. Has there been a collective voice on behalf of boards to have the ministry re-examine their position on EDC?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. When the changes came in play, I was able to lead a provincial working group between school boards, superintendents of business, and planners with the ministry to discuss the changes, the implications, inform their decision. And since then, the OASBO, so the Association of the School Board Association of Ontario, the planning committee of that has been working with our Council of School Board Officials and the ministry to continue the discussion. So there's an active working group right now that I unfortunately wasn't able to continue the work on it. However, our general manager of planning, Fred Thibault, is one of the members and is a voice on the impact of the current regulation and limitations on growth school boards.
Okay, thank you so much.
Are there any other questions regarding this report? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, please. Thank you very much. That passes unanimously. And now moving on to the Regional Internal Audit Status Report from Andrea Altherington. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much. So through the chair, the first thing I'd like to bring to your attention, well, actually, I guess I should introduce myself first. I'm Andrea Altherington, the new Regional Internal Audit Manager. I took over last week in charge of the Regional Internal Audit Team, which I've been part of for the past 11 years. Subsequent to my accepting the position, I was informed that the one remaining staff had accepted a position somewhere else. So it's down to a department of one now. We have posted for up to 3 senior regional internal auditors, as well as a temporary 9-month position. So we're hoping to have the team staffed up in the very near term. So one of the things when there is a new regional internal audit manager is that there needs to be the charter to be re-signed. This was formerly known as the Regional Internal Audit Mandate. I took this opportunity to include some changes to the Regional Internal Audit Charter based on a third-party review that another RIAT out of the Ottawa area underwent. So the changes are included in red, one of those being the change in name from mandate to charter. Other than that, there's very minimal changes. Does anyone have any questions about those? Okay, seeing none. I have provided a signed copy of the charter with the accepted changes to Carrie, so she will pass it to the director and to the audit committee chair to sign after the meeting and then return that to me for our records. The second item is due to the, that just explains some more background on the mandate or charter. So for the Regional Internal Audit Plan, we had the retirement of the Regional Internal Audit Manager at the end of September. And as I've just explained, we need to rebuild the team with me taking over that position of manager. I just want to let the audit committee know that there may be some changes to the audit plan for this year that was approved last school year may be required going forward. I will bring that to your attention as soon as we have the staffing in place and know what our capabilities are. Any questions on that? Okay, so then I think there's a motion that the audit committee receive the status update.
Yes, and thank you very much for your report. We look forward to working with you and to having many successful audits in the near future. So the motion reads, be it resolved that the audit committee receive the regional internal audit status update and that the report be included in the audit committee summary to the Board of Trustees. And the mover is Dan Mackerel, seconded by Leah Reynolds. Is there any comment or are there any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you. That passes unanimously. Thank you very much for that report. And I have to go back to my agenda now so that I know where I am.
Chair Collard, if
Yes.
I may.
Yep.
I think we skipped over. I did such a great job at selling you the financial statements that we skipped over the Deloitte report for the year end. And at the end of that, we do have the audit committee formal approval of the financial statements and recommendation to the board. So that motion has to be approved.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. My apologies, Lillian.
No problem.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you, Superintendent Ngoy, for raising that. And thank you to the committee through you, Chair Collard, for allowing me the opportunity to present to you the results of our audit for this year. As you've already had an opportunity to hear from Superintendent Ngoy on the results of the financial statements for this year, I will keep my commentary fairly brief. And I will actually walk you through, starting from the executive summary that is on page 41 of the package. Before I begin with actually speaking to you through the results of the audit, I do want to extend my thanks to the finance team at the school board. They are, as always, efficient, but also extremely cooperative and extremely prepared for us for this year's audit. And that really speaks to the clean audit results this year. So great thanks to them for their efforts again this fiscal year. As a reminder to the committee, our audit plan was presented to you back in April of 2021, which outlined the procedures that we intended to focus on, the audit risks which we had initially preliminarily assessed for this year, as well as our planned materiality level, which drives the extent of our audit for this year. I'm very pleased to report back to you in terms of our audit results that those have remained consistent. We were able to conduct our audit as we had initially planned back in April with no changes. So that is good to hear. A few areas that I do want to draw your attention to in terms of overall highlights of the audit. In terms of the actual materiality level that was used, we have historically determined the materiality level based on 2.5% of the consolidated expense of the school board, which worked out to approximately $20 million. This is the level that we use to assess whether or not, on the whole, the financial statements are fairly presented for the school board. Of more importance to the committee is that we're required to present to you any uncorrected misstatements that we identify as part of the audit above a 5% threshold of this materiality level, which works out to $1 million. That means that on an individual transaction basis, if we identify anything above that $1 million basis, we're required to report it back to the audit committee. I'm very pleased to report that there were no uncorrected misstatements identified as part of our audit, which again speaks to the good work of the finance team this year. As I've mentioned before, on the left-hand side of this page, as part of our audit plan, we identified 5 areas of audit risks that we wanted to focus on as part of this year's audit. This list is not exhaustive. It only highlights those items that are most unique to school boards in general, but also to the Halton District School Board as well in particular. Further on in this report, we do go through in greater detail as to the specific procedures that we performed as part of our audit. And you'll see that in each of these areas, we had no findings to report. In the current year, in particular, as it relates to revenue recognition, we did note that because of COVID-19, there were some changes and increases to the priorities and partnership revenue streams that were received in the current year. And we had performed procedures specifically as it relates to that. And you would have seen that as part of our audit results in that audit risk area in particular. The other area that we do want to highlight for your information as well is as it relates to school generated funds as well. Given the various school closures, there was a decrease in the activity level this year, which is also notable in the financial statements themselves. Moving on to the next page, in terms of the overall status of the audit as well as outstanding items, we've noted here 3 areas which are considered to be housekeeping in nature that are outstanding prior to us finalizing the audited financial statements. All of these areas are expected to be completed upon the board approval of the financial statements themselves, which will allow us to issue our clean audit opinion. In terms of the audit highlights, there were no changes in audit risks, which we've identified as noted before, and they're consistent with our audit plan. And there are also no internal control deficiencies as well to report. So again, very good news. As it relates to overall results, we are prepared now and in a position to issue a clean audit opinion on the financial statements upon the completion of those outstanding items and the approval by the board of the financial statements themselves. So maybe I'll pause here. That's really all we wanted to present overall in terms of our audit results report, but happy to take any questions.
Sana, is your hand up from a prior vote?
Yes.
Thank you. I don't see any questions regarding this report. Do we need a motion to receive this, Roxana? Thank you. Okay, then a motion to receive made by Trustee Reynolds, seconded by Dan Mackerel. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you very much. That passes unanimously. And now to move on to the financial statements. Superintendent Ngoy.
So this is the cover report to both the financial statements and the auditor's report with the recommendations for the audit committee to make a recommendation to the board to receive and approve the financial statements that have been reviewed at this meeting.
Thank you, and I'll put the motion on the floor. Be it resolved that the Audit Committee recommends the audited financial statements of the Halton District School Board for the fiscal year ended August 31, 2021 be approved by the Board of Trustees. Moved by Dan Mackerel, seconded by Sana Malik. Is there any discussion regarding this motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you. That passes unanimously. We're going swimmingly now. And we've already done the REAT because I got myself twisted up and backwards. So I believe that moves us out of ratification items into communication to the Audit Committee. And we have a report from Superintendent Ngoy regarding supplemental reporting, annual statement of education development charges report.
Thank you. And through the chair to the audit committee, this is the annual report of the education development charges that is required as per the regulation. And it provides a bit of a history, especially for our members of the public, in terms of the current 2018 bylaw and a couple of amendments that have been approved in 2019 and 2021. We have maximized the charge per residential unit or per square foot for a commercial or non-residential development. And at this point, there's a table in the report that outlines the remaining couple of years of this bylaw. Every bylaw is on a 5-year term, and showing the progressive increase into those levies that take into account that maximum ceiling amount that we can raise it every year. We are looking at providing or starting rather the work for a new bylaw and the background study that will take a lot more time than in the past, as we are now looking at incorporating a couple of elements such as coordination for the localized education development agreements, or the LEDAs as we call them provincially, and alternate accommodation projects, which are meant to be submitted by the development community in an effort to minimize the land size that we may need for future schools, and see if we can have some alternate projects that may reduce that and therefore reduce the future increases to the education development charges. And with that, Appendix A to the report provides you with a summary. We've started with an opening balance of a deficit of 25.4 million and have received revenues of 28.7 million and had various expenditures in the amount of 24.2 for a closing balance of a deficit of 20 million and almost 900,000. A lot of the site acquisitions there for our sites in North Milton, South Milton, North Oakville, in terms of our growth sites. So in particular, if I look at the $22 million in site acquisitions, they do mainly relate to Milton 11 and Milton 12 site acquisitions for the year. And I'm happy to take any questions trustees may have. Thank you.
Trustee Gray.
Thank you. Through the chair caller to Roxana. I have a not so pleasant memory of the last time that there was a provincial election and how that interfered with the business that we needed to be doing with EDCs. Is there any worry that with an impending provincial election coming up, that this once again could be something that could be interfered with?
Thank you for that question. There may be a chance. I believe that we are in a more fortunate position in terms of timing, so that by the time we need to approve this bylaw is beyond the next election, so into the next term, and things should be back to a normal approving items, etc., by the ministries. So my feeling, I don't believe we are in the same predicament as last time for this to lapse. Depending on the continuity of the government, I do believe that they are accustomed to what this entails, and allowing a bylaw to lapse wouldn't be something that should be occurring in the future. And I do know Trustee Gray is referring to a few days of a lapsed bylaw when we lost our ability to be a taxing authority for the purposes of education development charges, and we've lost I believe it was about 1.8 million in just a couple of days, literally overnight, because we were not able to collect charges on those development that had submitted their application during those couple of days, and that isn't recoverable. However, that cost is in our embedded in our deficit, and we are actively monitoring for that. I don't believe that's going to be repeating in the future. It certainly doesn't make up for the lost revenue since the last bylaw lapsed and the new bylaw restrictions.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions or comments regarding this report? Seeing none, we will move on to the summary of trustee expense report. Back to you, Superintendent Ngoy.
Thank you, and through Chair Caller to the Audit Committee. This is the annual report on trustee expenses in accordance with the board policy on trustee expenses. It is divided into two different sections. One is looking at the summary of board paid expenses for trustees in terms of telecommunication and travel, conferences, and technology in equipping and enabling trustees to discharge their responsibilities in the office, as well as a summary of expenses reimbursed to trustees as well. So we're looking at conferences and meeting expenses. They are lower than last year, and last year was a lot significantly lower than the prior year. The obvious reason is the pandemic and restrictions in terms of travel and the ability to attend the professional development and networking sessions that are critical to the trustee and the networking and collaboration on a province-wide level. At the beginning of this trustee term, there was $66,000 in carryover for the unused portion of the expenses that has been increasing since then. So the current amount is up to, I think it's one more page down, Carrie. So the current year is 82,000. So it has gone up for the reasons I mentioned before. The detailed trustee expenses per trustee will be updated on the website by the end of December. Thank you.
Trustee Reynolds.
Thank you. Through Chair Collard to Superintendent Ngoy, do we include student trustee expenses in here as well?
I will need to look into my details, but student trustee expenses, they do get an allotment for $2,500. I don't believe this is including the student trustees. I believe this is for the Board of Trustees, but I'll do a double check and come back to your question.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments regarding this report? Seeing none, we will move on to the report summary of school-generated funds.
And that's me again. This is another annual report that accompanies the financial statements. A portion of the items that we include in our consolidated financial statements is the school generated funds, which are they are recorded at the school level. We do keep track at the school level, and the roll forward amount is enveloped for the purposes of the school community that has raised those funds. This report provides you with a breakdown between elementary and secondary panel and the last, I believe, 5 or so years. If we go to Appendix A, in terms of both the revenue and expenses by category, you will note that we had as much as $20 to $21 million in the past in terms of revenues and expenses in school generated funds across all of our schools. The prior year, so 1920, that went down to 11 million as the pandemic hit halfway through the year, or a bit more than halfway through the year. And there have been a number of reimbursements at the time for items that were not able to be accomplished, such as trips. And the current year end for 2020-2021, it's even less so, because we had a full year of the pandemic, and therefore there were no fundraising activities, there were no extracurriculars. So there's some fees at the school level that had occurred, so about 1.6 million in revenues, and the expenses are about 2.9 million. We are not concerned that the expenses are exceeding the revenues because we do have a $4 million rollover remaining, and schools have been working diligently in reducing the rollover year over year for school generated funds, with the thought that fundraising dollars should be spent while the students that contributed to that amount are still in school and can benefit from those initiatives and purchases, etc. So we've reduced the rollover from a $6 million to about $4 million. There is an amount that should be rolled forward because some of the student fees are being collected the previous year for the future year. So there's always going to be a roll forward balance. But reducing it a little bit does make sense for matching the revenue with when the students are in the schools. And I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Trustee Gray.
Thank you very much, through the chair, to Roxana. I see, as you have expressed, the rollover is now about 4 million, and that's better than it was last year because we have been able to reduce that rollover. And I think it's really important that, as we understand that most of these monies are collected by students, for students, and in the year in which they're collected for students. I think of, for example, a field trip. It should be a money in, money out for the most part, unless it's a large trip that might be planned for years to come. And we haven't had that lately because of the inability to travel out of province or even overseas. I just really need to understand why 4 million to me is a very large number. And I understand that each school can roll over upwards of $30 per student. But once again, the need to roll over upwards of $30, I don't think we've had in the last couple of years any plans that would be of a futuristic nature to have to roll over money. So my question is simply this. How do we promote a reduction in the holdings that schools have in their school generated funds so that these funds raised for projects fund the projects in a timely manner so that the students who raised the funds and the families behind them benefit at a time in which they're in school? Just wondering if you could provide some insights on that. Thank you.
So I could certainly give it a try, but I was wondering whether our manager of school financial services would like to address.
Yes, thank you, Roxana. So through the chair, out of that $4 million, keep in mind the actual fundraising dollars in terms of school fundraising and school council fundraising amounts to only about $1.1 million of the carry forward balance. So there are other things that are happening through the school generated funds bank accounts, one of which was mentioned by Superintendent Nagoy about student fees that are collected in advance, in particular for our advanced programs in IB and in iSTEM. So that amounts to almost $1 million of that $4 million carry forward is either fees that are collected in advance or fees that are carried over from the previous year. And in that balance as well, there's also grants and donations received by the schools, one of which is one of our biggest partners, of which being Halton Food for Thought. So around $500,000 in that carry forward is related to the Halton Food for Thought and funds that the schools weren't able to spend last year, but that they have balances that they've carried over to resume those programs in the current year. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that the balance, it's not just all about fundraising and school generated funds, and that there are other clubs, activities. The rollover for the field trips, though, is a very, very small percentage. It's less than 3% of the $4 million is actually related to field trips. I hope that helps to clarify, but I'm happy to take additional questions.
Well, thank you very much. As always, it's just a matter of ensuring that the funds that are raised go to the projects that the funds are raised for, and so that the students benefit from them. Thank you for breaking that down to 1.1 million is sitting there in our school council, I guess, fundraising accounts. And perhaps they will be looking towards spending more of that money this year as well. Thank you.
Yes, Carrie.
The other thing to keep in mind is that there could also be timing differences, and especially since the pandemic, there have been a lot of delays in terms of the supply chain. So in a lot of schools' cases, they have actually ordered items to spend with their fundraising dollars, but unfortunately, due to circumstances out of their control, they're not able to receive, or those items haven't turned into expenses yet. So just keep that in mind as another another factor. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, Carrie. The next item on the agenda is the timelines for financial reporting. Back to you, Superintendent Nagoy.
Wonderful. Just before I get to that, I did want to come back to Trustee Reynolds' question. The student trustees are included in those amounts. There's a little bit on PD. There hasn't been a lot going on over the last year for them either.
Thank you for that.
My pleasure. So with that, this is just for your information. I don't want to take any time. It just provides you with the key dates. I think if we go down on this page, Carrie, we do have 21, 22 dates. So as we're looking at right now, sorry, just above the November 17th approval of the financial statements of the board concludes all of our dates for last year's reporting. So we went through the three main reporting cycles: the budget, revised, and then the approval of the financial statements. With the last year, we had monthly interim reports to keep an eye on our spending and funding due to the uncertainty. For 21-22, the board approved the budget in June. We're looking at quarterly financial quarterly financial reports as we move forward, the year end, I don't think we have it here, and then we would be certainly looking at the approved budget the revised budget in mid-November and approval of the financial statements for this year in mid-November of 2022. So that is just a quick overview, and we'll link the reports here as we are passing those dates, and they're for the benefit of the audit committee, and they're presented on the board meetings during those dates.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any questions about the reporting schedule. The next item is the financial statements for the Halton Student Transportation Services.
Thank you. And you thought we're done with the financial statements, haven't you? One other thing that is included in our consolidated financial statements is our proportion of the share of expenses and revenues through the Halton Student Transportation Services. That has a board of directors, as it is an incorporated separate legal entity, and the board of directors is made up of the chairs of the board for the Catholic and the public board, so the 2-member boards, the directors of education, and the superintendents of business from each entity. And these have been approved the last week's board of directors meeting, and we represent approximately 2/3 of the cost. It's based on student ridership, but also the proportion doesn't always keep up with that ratio if we have different decisions in terms of programs, such as our CPP programs. They would obviously be part of our expenses and not shared with the Catholic board if they do not have similar programs. All in all, we do have about 1.6 million overspending in the transportation costs versus funding for the prior year. Most of that is as a result of additional time it took to drive for midday transportation for secondary schools for the hybrid model, as well as additional cleaning time for in between runs, the morning and the afternoon run for the buses. I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Trustee Gray. Your mic, Trustee Gray.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, through the chair, to Roxana. With HSTS, when expenditures are larger than revenues, does the Catholic and Public School Board share in the deficit equally?
Thank you for that question. We do not share equally, I would say. So in the most of that proportion would be based on ridership. And if we are about 2/3 of ridership versus 1, we would certainly share 2/3 of the cost, plus any additional program costs we may have that the Catholic board may not have, and they would have any other costs for their programs that we may not have, etc. So mainly, yes, we do share the cost. And then the funding formula is separately. Each board has a funding formula that runs through our ministry forms based on, in part, some of it is based on overall enrollment and fuel escalation, de-escalation factors, and some other areas. So the parameters are the same, but because of programming and because of overall enrollment component, which doesn't necessarily prorate to the same ridership percentage, it may not be exactly the same, but overall, we do see about the same proportion of overspending. When we have overspending, they also see an overspending too.
Just a follow-up, please.
Yep.
Given that we are over, was it, I think, 1.7 million in expenditure? I think you said?
1.6.
1.6, sorry. Given that we're over 1.6, I think I heard at one time that there is a transportation review underway. There's a committee that's been formed. It's maybe picking up on the work of another committee that was a couple of years back, but never got any traction. And you just sort of, caused a light bulb in my head, given the increasing costs of fuel, chances are that we may be heading down a path that takes us even in a greater deficit this year. So I'm wondering if you could give us any information about that transportation review and how it might address probably what is a board-to-board deficit when it comes to transportation.
Certainly, thank you for that. One of the reasons I had to step down from the EDC committee is that I am now on the transportation committee provincially, and trying to keep up with or informing some of those decisions with my colleagues and the other members of the transportation committee and consortiums. What they're currently looking at, there's a review of the funding formula and parameters, and the thought behind is that the end goal is for next year's grants for student needs to include a revised formula for transportation, which will have consistent parameters that would be tied to that. Those parameters may or may not align with ours. So far, we're looking at the data collection and scenarios, and they seem to be sort of in the direction where we are, but we don't know where that will end up. There's also been a review on the procurement of services from the bus operators, and I know that for our consortium, we've been competitively procuring. So we have RFPs that we've awarded through a competitive bid process. So we are certainly a model in the province. So I don't expect those recommendations would change our procurement process. The funding will change. My concern is if there's going to be similar redistribution of funding. So here's the new formula, but we're redistributing the same amount, and there's going to be some boards that are losing funds, some boards that are gaining funds, and not necessarily adding based on growth and needs and adding routes. And we are a growth board, so we do have an increasing cost pressure in transportation year over year. So I don't have more information. I know that work will be reflected in the grants for student needs in the spring for the following year. And my concern is that the funding overall, the funding pot will stay the same, will just be redistributed a little bit differently. And I don't know if we're going to be gaining or losing grant as a result.
Thank you, Roxana, for those concerns. I think we saw a similar example of that happen a few years back with when it came to special education. I see Trustee Collard nodding her head in memory of that, taking the same size of pie, just cutting it up in different ways. Let's hope that that's not the case. Thank you for that.
I'm going to hold my tongue on my comment about that. Next on the agenda is a verbal report on Excellence in Education Administrative Fund.
That is me again. So this is just an update to the committee, and we'll inform the board next week at the board meeting as well in director's report. The Excellence in Education Administrative Fund has changed names a couple of times, but it has been provided by the ministry since this government took office in an effort to provide consulting services to school boards or other public sector agencies in finding efficiencies. Our board has not previously taken on a submission because we've started this mandate with a big reduction in that first year, and we have been sort of recovering from that. We've reduced 189 positions and $25 million that first year, and those were all the efficiencies we could handle, or more than we could handle, I would say, in terms of the impacts to our system. As we've been sort of rebuilding the resources, there's additional funding that has been provided with COVID. We've turned our attention again to this, and the senior team have decided to put forward a report or a submission to the ministry to make use of this funding in the area of reviewing staffing complement, automating controls, and looking for efficiencies that would save both time and workload, as well as have the ability to save costs as well, since salary and benefits make up 80% of our budget. So we're going to have that submission to the ministry is due by the end of November, and we will have an invitational process to request for quotation for this particular scope of work from a number of consultants. And we will unfold from there. And I believe it has to be wrapped up by the end of this fiscal year, so by August 31st. We will certainly provide updates to the committee, the audit committee, as well as the board, should we be approved in terms of the scope of work. And then as we move forward and have an update on the actual progress of the project. I'd be happy to take any questions.
I'm not seeing any questions on this report. Thank you very much for providing this information. I do believe that concludes most of the business. What we have left would be any questions from the public. Carrie, is there anything on the list today?
I've just confirmed there are no responses to the survey. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So then that means that I am looking for a motion to adjourn. Trustee Gray, seconded by Dan Mackerel. Are there any questions or concerns with adjourning? Seeing none, all those in favor. Thank you all very much for attending this afternoon. It was a very informative meeting. It was a pleasure to meet some new faces around the table, and we look forward to working with all of you